Hello, friends. Welcome back to the School of Self-Worth. I am your host, Nicole Song. And I have to say, I am really, truly always so honored and so grateful to have this podcast because it has connected with me with such remarkable women. And today is no exception. So I've been celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which is all of May, by featuring some really incredible Asian American women. And today, we get to meet Dr. Stephanie Wong. So, Stephanie is a licensed clinical psychologist. She's the host of the podcast Color of Success, and she's the author of Cancel the Filter: Realities of a Psychologist, Podcaster, and Working Mother of Color. And in our conversation, Cancel the Filter is truly about understanding and getting behind the filter that so many of us put on our lives and the challenges women have around revealing what is truly going on in a vulnerable and transparent way. And Stephanie just has such an incredible insight from her perspective as a psychologist, her own experience being a working mother, and also the layers that can come into being an Asian American woman and how that affects our mental health. So you definitely want to stay tuned because she gives us some concrete steps on how to make those changes and what exactly she would do if she was you to support your mental health on a deeper level, particularly around social media. I know this is something that all of us are constantly grappling with. So, if you are an Asian American woman who wants to know how to work 5-hour days while still getting your dream promotion, DM me 5 because I have got something for you. Okay, friends, let's dig into this amazing conversation. Stephanie, I'm so glad to have you here. I have been holding back on the thing I want to talk to you about most, but first, welcome to the School of Self-Worth.
Thank you for having me at the school. I never thought that I would come back to school, but here I am. So I am so appreciative to connect with you today.
I mean, we have so many things to talk about, but of course, the thing I want to talk to you about the most, I mean, we won't tell everybody about it too much, is that I'm also a BTS ARMY, and I was like so excited.
Oh,
I saw it in the background, and I like made myself not say anything for those of you watching the video because I was like, I'm going to hold off talking to her about it until we're recording because
oh my God.
I know
I'm
you'd be so
so
excited.
happy to meet you even more.
I know, right? I was like, oh, army to army. It's like so much fun. I mean, we won't do too much BTS talk, but I
Yeah.
just want to know who your bias is, and then we can move on.
Namkook.
Oh,
I
both
can
of them.
cheat. I cheat.
Amazing.
What about you?
I am a V bias, but JK is like hot on his heels pretty much constantly. So
He's grown now.
he has grown quite a bit. I actually am going to New York soon, and I was messaging with some of my friends over there. I'm like, is his billboard, his Calvin Klein billboard still up? And they're like, no, it is definitely not. And I was like, oh.
Well, if I find it in Korea this summer, I will definitely take a picture and send it to you.
And my dream is to go to Korea and do a Seoul BTS tour and then also go to all the different places. So,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, now that we have gotten that out of the way, we can kind of come back into what we're here to really, even though, so for those of you listening, BTS, if you're an ARMY, you could probably talk. I mean, I know I could talk for hours about them and we could do a whole podcast on them, but that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk to Stephanie about her own journey and learn more about you. So, could you just actually give us a little bit of a background about who you are and how you arrived at the School of Self-Worth today? Like, what is the journey that's brought you to today?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a clinical psychologist by trade, and I've worked at a VA hospital for over a decade. And I then started a private practice. I totally didn't think about becoming a podcaster. 2020, I was inspired to take a free workshop because I love free things, to learn about podcasting from Dr. Varghese and Selling the Couch podcast. And that podcast really helped me build my practice in 2016. So I was like, anything that he puts out there, let me take a look at it. And I really thought, well, what do I have to share with the world? He asked about your why. And I really thought, well, we really need to destigmatize mental health in the AAPI community and among ethnic minority communities. There are so many people that are struggling, not just AAPI individuals, but I could not see everyone in private practice one-on-one. So I said, this might be a good way to share information, learn about people's stories and how they've dealt with some of these things, which is similar, I think, a similar vein to the School of Self Worth, in learning from different people. And I'm not the expert in everything, and I don't claim to be. And I think we have a lot of knowledge and people out there that could really help. So um, that led me to share my own story, which we could talk a little bit about later.
Yeah. Well, I really want to hear your story because I feel like it's probably related to what this question is, which is what would you say the stigma is around mental health, particularly in AAPI communities?
Well, I think it's getting better. First off, let's start with that positive, and that a lot more people are seeking services. I'm seeing, a good proportion of my clients are AAPI identifying. But I think generationally, it was okay. Many of parents, grandparents, great grandparents were immigrants, and they were in survival mode. It wasn't like, hey, let me just think a little bit about how my mentals are. It was, I need to put food on the table. I need to find a place to live and survive. And so that, though, transmits a lot of generational trauma to future and current generations. But the stigma really is, I think Brother Sun did it best in the recent Netflix show, in that, oh, we don't talk about emotions. That's not something that we talk about. And it's, you work hard, you put your head down, and, just don't think about it. And I saw that it's very detrimental for a lot of people.
You bring up so many things just even in that summary of it. Like I think about my parents and I often have to talk about like how they are children of war. My mom is Taiwanese, like it was occupied by Japan. My
Yes.
dad fled mainland China for Hong Kong, like because of war. And I think a lot of times because they come over and they came over for education, like a lot of people during that generation. But at the same time, it's like they came, it was an escape, like education was like their entry point here, but they
Yes.
actually had such traumatic experiences. And I really, I know my parents are not the only one. I'm just sharing that because that's my experience of knowing them and their backstory. And it's kind of amazing how, like when you grow up as a kid, and I always think about, I'm going to blank on the name of the movie, but the movie that was Jhumpa Lahiri's book, and it was about an Indian child and his parents. And like there was this one moment in that movie that was so profound for me where, like they were showing all the background of India and the culture that his parents were in, and then they did this cut to him in New York City, like being a Columbia student, right? And there was such a contrast. And I was
Yeah.
like, that was a moment that I actually think I first started to really understand my parents' experience of, coming from these different cultures, coming from more, and then raising your children in America and like that just divide. So that really came up for me when you were speaking, but also that piece around emotions. Like my parents and I didn't say I love you until college. And I think I kind of was like, I love you. And like that was how it started to
Whoa, whoa. We're
right?
getting there.
Getting really serious here. But like it really was, because that's just how I grew up. And anyways, you speak to, I think, so many things around that. So thank you for sharing that. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and so I'm curious for you, because I'm sure that some of your own journey is how you got to this place where you wanted to support people with that. So could you share a little bit more about your journey as well?
Absolutely. So I went to a magnet high school in San Francisco, and 90% identified as Asian American. And so we actually lost a student to suicide during my time there, and there were no resources offered. It was obviously very sad. But there was no counselors, there was no debrief on how everyone was feeling. And so I thought, well, this is something that I really want to explore. And I was one of the lucky ones who declared a major and actually liked it moving forward. So I was pre psychology going right into undergrad, and found that I really wanted to work with clients. And so I went straight to get my PhD in clinical psychology, moved to Virginia from California, never been out of the state, at that point. And that was a journey in itself, but it did bring me to be able to work with the populations that I've wanted to work with.
Mm. And then what did you discover for yourself, especially starting to pay attention again to the stigma and mental health? Like, what did you grow up with, and with maybe within your own family? And then what have you discovered over really trying to support people and help them to start to say yes more to therapy and to support?
Yeah, and first I want to say a good therapist has a good therapist. And so I stand by that, in that becoming a good therapist and continuing to grow as one, you really need to build that self awareness and build that. Um, uh, Look at yourself and see how what you bring to the room, what you bring to relationships. But when growing up, we didn't talk about emotions, and I think, again, that generational trauma of my grandma and my mother and her siblings grew up in Chinatown in San Francisco in poverty. And there was a lot of negative emotional, psychological impact of that. And I saw that growing up with my mom just being very depressed. I didn't really understand it at that time. And so I recognized that I gravitated towards school to cope. Like, this is something that I excel in. I have friends, I'm building a community, but that really had an impact on the decisions to go into this field, because I was like, wow, if these resources or this willingness to go to therapy was there, things could have been very different a lot earlier. My mom is really good right now and has done a lot of work, great grandma, to my kids. But I think when you are brought up to like not cry, and even though you're disappointed, it's like, oh, doing that is wrong. And so I think that's what happens to me, is like I cry when I'm upset, not necessarily when I'm like super sad, but I'm like, oh, and then I feel guilty for crying. So you have to unlearn some of these things that you were taught in childhood that may not serve you well right now.
That's really powerful because I feel like so many of us don't even recognize at first, and then when you start to recognize it, it's like, how do you start to change that pattern in the future? And I'm curious
Mhm.
because your book, Cancel the Filter, is also very much about motherhood and like, really being more open about your experience. But I'm curious if for you, becoming a mom made this more important for you.
Absolutely. I At first, like I mentioned, I really was like, what do I have to contribute to the world? I had this manuscript there since 2020. I didn't publish it until the end of 2023. And because it's a book of real talk, it's not this theoretical, psychological psychobabble, as my friends would call it. It's actually my experience. And as you can see already from my personality, I'm pretty lively. And so I really wanted to dispel the myth that working mothers have to have it all together. And we're constantly put up against these images on social media, and we may subconsciously do it to each other as well. Of like, I use an example of these perfect holiday pictures where everyone has matching outfits and perfect smiles. But I'm like, how long did it take to get everybody dressed, everyone looking at the camera, everyone smiling? Like, it probably took hours. And we're seeing these wonderful pictures. And not to say like I don't like seeing the pictures, it's just more of like, let's get real about what this is about, what these Christmas cards are about, what these holiday cards are about. So it was very, very important for me to share my story, so that I have two girls, so that both my girls knew that this is something that they can read later as well. Of, wow, it wasn't that easy to have children during, your postdoctoral fellowship and early career.
Yeah. Well, and as you were speaking about it too, I'm curious for you about when we have those photos, because they exist. What does it do to us to see that kind of stuff over and over again? Because we don't get the backstory. Like I do enough social media that I understand how much effort it takes to do
Yes.
those things. But most people scrolling through are just sort of like, oh, like pretty photos, like it's great. But what would you say it happens to us mentally around seeing that stuff?
I think by nature, there is social comparison and the socialization piece of like, for families, for instance, if we're running with this example, it's like, oh, like, I am a mess. I wasn't able to do a holiday card this year. Or, oh man, like ours didn't turn out that well. And all these things run in our heads of like what we're not doing well, versus like, it's okay to just try to make it day to day. And get by in that way, and maybe post a picture of the kid crying when they see Santa Claus, because really Santa Claus is a scary concept if you think about it. But,
Yes.
you know, I think that that's what I'm saying, is that we post curated photos, curated stories and messages, and canceling the filter is really like, well, what's really behind all of it?
hmm And then what would you say for yourself then is important? Is it like telling the stories? Is it showing up with messy photos? Like, how do we all start to help dismantle that a little bit?
I think as much as you're comfortable doing that, but I think the aspect of actually sharing the realities of things. So you might have the perfect picture, but maybe side by side you could have some of the funny behind the scenes one where, one kid is running and there's only four people here. Trying to share those moments with people and also being honest. I think a lot more people are saying motherhood is hard. This is, breastfeeding is hard and things like that. But the more and more that we share those things, the less people will feel alone. And of course, it's great to celebrate happy moments, but I think struggles or growth edges, as one of the psychologists would put it, is very important to share as well.
Mm. And what do you see like when people do that? Does that start to help them feel like it's okay? I'm connected. I can actually do this.
I think so. I think it's about building community. With the podcast, I've heard a lot of feedback of like, "Oh, I've been through that." That one really resonated with me because I struggle with like feeling like I belong at work, or I have difficulty with social skills, or discrimination and all those, isms that we face. And so I think the whole point of the book really was so that people don't feel alone. I did feel isolated at many points in during pregnancy, in motherhood, because my husband and I thought, people are going to start having kids a couple years, at least within a couple years. No, now I have a 12-year-old and everyone's having like their second and third babies. And I was like, haha, they can wipe their own asses. Like, but, but the thing is, I've been there, and I'm glad that, people are having those experiences, but that it is going to get better in terms of self sufficiency. So I try to like impart some support to my friends.
Mm. And what would you, I mean, this is something that's, I think we forget often too, like whatever's happening on social media, that comparison is really affecting our mental health. And what would you say is happening for people around that specifically?
Whew, it's there's so much to unpack there, but I will say, especially with people who care about what's going on in the world, it can really, really drain you mentally and physically. And so it is really important to set boundaries with yourself as to how much you're going to engage in social media and what the content is. Of course, algorithms are what people hope to, create, that give you that curated view of the world. But I think there's a lot of stuff going on, and part of that is building up this self awareness that this may not be as healthy for me. It might be hindering my growth. And even though I'm seeing all these wonderful things people are doing, am I feeling that great about myself? Is it, chipping away at my self worth, or is it actually empowering me? I know, like, when you're on LinkedIn, everyone is posting pictures of galas and promotions and all those things. But what about the people that got laid off, or, that have difficulty with mental health and they can't even get out of bed to look for a job? I mean, there needs to be a balance, for self, but for others too, about being mindful about what they post, and how maybe it may negatively impact others.
So just like really starting to look at like what boundaries do I need to have in checking. I know I find that for myself too. It's like when I am reading a lot and I'm not on social media, like my mental health is so much better because I'm just not
Yes.
paying attention to what's going on. And it's something I do for work. And so I do need to be on there sometimes. But I always am trying to figure out like what's an amount that works for me and feels okay versus being on there constantly because the mindless scrolling is like so easy for everybody to get into.
and companies bank on that. And we're a part of this media as well with the podcast. But I actually sold my smartwatch, or my husband did, because I realized during a vacation when I took it off, I felt so much more at ease.
Mm.
And so I said, you know what? I have some nice old school watches, my little Anne Klein from like 20 years ago. I'm gonna put that one on and learn how to change a battery, which was really fun. Kind of nerdy, but I learned how to change the battery, and it just feels a lot better. Yeah, we walk around with our phones even in the people bring it to the toilet now. So have not having that buzz every email that goes off and all that has really helped tremendously for me.
That's good to know. I never did the smartwatch because I was nervous about that. I was like, I
Yeah.
feel like this is going to stress me out. So I put it aside, but I can imagine if it's constantly my phone is stressful enough. So I'm always like, you just have to sit over there for a while. And I'm
Yes.
not gonna I'm not gonna hang out with you. We're gonna just do other things. Well, I'm curious if you feel like this, and this might be something that comes up more in Seattle because we have like the Seattle freeze and people having trouble making friends and having deep connection. Do you
Mm.
think that social media has affected people's ability to like be really honest and vulnerable in relationships? And this is like a very broad swath question, but I'm just kind of curious if you've noticed that and if that, because I know that contributes to people's decline in mental health. But do you notice people struggling for like those really open conversations that help them feel connected to people?
I think there are layers to it. I think the pandemic did not help.
Mm.
I'm seeing a lot of the children who went to school on Zoom. Like my youngest went to school in first grade on Zoom, and very different emotional development than my older
Mm.
one. And I mean, as they went back to school, they're learning more and more, but there needs to be some kind of some catch up. Now with the pandemic, even with adults, I also see that. Like it took and it's taking some kind of recall memory or re-socialization to actually have conversations, even human to human, person to person. And that social media can create a barrier to having those conversations. I mean, some people, that we talk to on our podcasts, we've never met in person, yet we feel close to them. And then when you meet them, possibly, I haven't, knock on wood, I haven't had that, but it could feel awkward because there is an actual physical technological barrier between people. And so even when we were taught to provide therapy, we think about even having a table in between the therapist and the client as a physical barrier between kind of building the relationship. So that's parallel to what may be going on here. And I think initially these networking applications were made to help people connect, but now it's almost like this: you have a technology alter ego, and then there's really you, and it's hard for people to differentiate which is which.
It's true. I mean, I actually really feel different sometimes than I am online versus in person. And, like even just what I'm wearing, because I'm like, okay, you can't see the bottom half. I'm just going to
Oh
wear
yeah.
whatever. Right. Versus like I'm going to an in person event and I was like, I have to wear pants that make sense with
I
my
know, isn't that
top.
weird now? I'm like, do I have to wear pants? Like I love
Totally.
sweatpants.
I'm like, is like my shoes are gonna match this whole outfit, right? Like there's just
Yeah.
much more of a thought of like that. And I've many times met like my online friends in person. I'm like, you're tall, or
Yeah.
you're like, they're just different from what I expected. And then also their energy is really different in person than it is online too. And so it is fascinating what you're saying that the adults have had just as much trouble with that as the kids
Mhm.
post pandemic. Well, what would you say then for people who are like, okay, I would like to help to start to resolve this. Like, I would like to feel more connected to the people in my life and feel like I really know what's going on or feel, just like I have this community.
Yeah, I mean it's tough, right? Because people are all over different states, countries and things like that, but I I think my husband and I do a pretty good job of making time and keeping those times as if they were appointments or work commitments to visit people, to invite them over to our house. We just got one of those automatic mahjong tables.
Mhm.
And so my mom lives with us, so we play every night, but we invite a fourth seat over, and yeah, we rotate, and that kind of brings people together. So I think there's these, it doesn't have to be these grand things of flying to see each other, but like if you do live locally too, and you just, we get busy. We don't necessarily even make the time to see people 20-30 minutes away because, yeah, you got to wear pants and you got to drive. And it's made even more of a barrier now that we have technology usage. But I think just really being intentional about what your value is in terms of relationships and living consistently with that value of connection.
I love that you have a fourth spot at the mahjong table. I have a tap class and we were talking about doing a mahjong night too because we had it anyways. And I was like, oh yeah, like just having people over. I think sometimes it feels foreign to us or it doesn't occur to us, or we're only doing it for like our kids instead of being like, no, like actually, I
Yes.
just want to have an adult friend come to my house and like hang out and play games or something
Yeah.
as
Well,
well.
Bay Area, come on, fourth
Yeah,
seat.
I know.
We're
Next
waiting.
time I'm
We're waiting
down
for
there, I'll be
you.
like, can I
For
come play?
sure. No, you're so welcome. It would be so much fun.
And what would you say, like as we're doing this work, right, to like we built up all these filters and we've built up all of these barriers and boundaries. Like what are like sort of the simple, easy things we could even do in a day, like a regular work day to start to take it down, to just be like, okay, like today I'm going to just be a little bit more open or available or trying to make that shift.
Well, I think that's part of the intention, right? Is how do we make time for the things that matter most to us? And one of the things about the podcast is connection. I've always said that. I've made such great friends and been able to meet them in person. And so taking the time to meet you is very important to me. And so we're like, let's squeeze it in, let's finish, you have to make sacrifices. Can you accommodate that within your life? So I use a passion planner for the past, I don't know, 8 years. And this is not like, oh, give me an affiliate thing. This is something that I actually use and work and collaborate with my friends on in terms of mapping out goals, having to-do lists, personal and professional. And that includes putting down when I am meeting with my friends and my family and what are my goals in terms of really connecting with people. So I have to be pretty honest with myself. Like, am I burning myself out? And in fact, most of the time I am. So I'm like, all right, next week, I'm going to be taking a mental health day. And I encourage my staff to do that too. So I think it's really having a daily, hourly self assessment to see what do I need to do to intervene and protect me from myself.
Yes, I feel like that's half the battle. It's like what's going on with you and like what patterns and habits are you falling into that's keeping people at a distance in general. And would you say too, do you feel like it is more of a struggle with AAPI communities, or this is just like for you with the book, it's like just a general struggle for people in current times?
I think contextually, most people are having difficulty connecting, like I mentioned, especially with the tech usage. But I wouldn't say specifically AAPI individuals have hard time connecting. I think that what I really do love about the API community is people do try to welcome you. People do try to bring you in. There's a lot of organizations that are doing some great work, and it is really up to people to really connect and reach out to those organizations as well. So I see it as a dual relationship. People can really avoid these situations for a number of reasons, and maybe their identity isn't as salient for them right now. Um, and the whole point though is find communities and people that really bring you up and lift you up. It doesn't have to be specific demographics, but do you feel supported?
Yeah, I think that is so important. I always feel that for myself. It's like, where do I feel supported? And then to keep gravitating to those people and sticking with them and like helping that to happen. And I agree. I think that this podcast too for me has been a really great place for that. So I'm curious for you because this is the school of self worth. Like, where would you say your self worth journey has been for you to be able to cancel the filter, for you to be able to share your story? Because it's not easy to talk about like the raw, ugly things that you don't really want people to know about.
Mhm. It's been a long journey, and seeing some parallels between my oldest and how I was in middle school and high school. I mean, one, it's just freaking awkward, right? Like you're going through all these changes, the socialization, the cliques, and all these things. And I think my self confidence, one, I've been with my husband since high school, and I learned unconditional love from him, and just that I can be the person that I am. Like, even when someone loves you for like all the ugly sides, I'm not talking like looks, like waking up right in the morning, that too, but because this takes a lot of work. But when you may have a really bad day and they still can say, Let me be there for you." I mean, of course, within reason. We're not talking about like domestic violence or anything like that. Um, that has really helped me feel like, you know what, I can be who I am. And of course, I've been to therapy. I've continued to do some self-awareness work. But if you have supportive people that can give you that feedback and also reinforce and validate, you know what, you are a good person, that really has helped me tremendously, because people believe in you, and you also have to believe in yourself. I also have to say, forget the haters. There's always going to be haters. And I'm not just talking about like online or whatnot, but in work environments.
Mhm.
Some people are just, ugh, not very supportive. And so, but who is supportive? Because there are people out there. And to not overgeneralize that this person is representative of everybody. That's really, really hard when you're young.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such a process. Like and when you're young, it happens, and then you have to keep reminding yourself it's not
Yeah.
true. Or if there are haters when you're older, staying, like you said, with the people who are supportive. Well, I'm curious
Mhm.
for you. Like, I mean, putting a book out is like a huge self worth journey. And I'm curious how it's been showing up for you with putting Cancel the Filter into the world.
I think it's a little bit exhausting, actually. I thought the book was writing it. I mean, going through 20 iterations plus was difficult. The and part is now I'm like, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a book marketer, you know? And so the reason why I even reached out to you about the book is because I don't just randomly like mass email people on LinkedIn. And that's becoming a trend. I don't knock it. That's other people's marketing thing. But I want to actually connect with people that may have similar values to me. And it's interesting that, the BTS thing, because like at the end of my book is really how I talk about BTS being my sanity and really lifting my mood up. In fact, I watched like the Disney Permission to Dance concert the other day, and I was like, dang, I really miss them. And I went to that concert and I'm reminiscing. So I think what was helpful about the book is at least it's a conversation starter with people, um, and connecting with them. And a lot of parents and working mothers of color, um, it has opened up some conversations that weren't being had with some folks.
That's really powerful. I love that you see it as a connector because, you put all that effort into a book and like you have to feel like there's something that's happening with it that feels really good when you're putting it out into the world. And then I will also totally agree with you about BTS because like I got into them during the pandemic when I was separated from my ex at the time and I was just by myself and I would just like watch videos and then I found my community of people and I also was in LA by the way on day 3 and like we're just, and I was like, oh, like these 7 men are just like connecting people through their talent and who
Hmm.
they are. And it's like, it was so powerful for me to feel that connected to people who I literally have never met and will probably never, well, let's never say never. I
Yeah.
also have goals of someday meeting them in person. Yes.
I would like, I've always said that I will retire from podcasting after that. But
After you can have them on your
yeah,
podcast.
I
Yes.
just want, and I always joke with my family like, I just want to be friends with him. They're like, oh yeah, okay. And so and I'm just like, there. I mean, when you come over for that fourth seat, you'll see my Time magazine. I've been in Army since 2017, when they made their American debut. So I have all the stuff. I'm like, disposable income after I pay my bills and save for retirement is everything. I probably have more stuffed animals than my daughters. That's so sad. But I have no shame about it. So
That's hilarious. No, I actually laugh because my office is like half work stuff and half BTS. So I'm totally the same way as
it's
you.
all integrated. I see notebooks, alarm clocks, like everything, my Lego set. Yeah.
My Lego sets over there too. Yeah,
I,
totally.
I need to buy a display case though. I keep knocking down the ice cream cones, but yeah.
It's hilarious. Yes. Yes, but I'm with you. Like it's just sort of that piece of like how to bring us together. So anyways, I laugh because as you all can probably tell, we could talk about BTS for a very long
Yes.
time. And I will say too though, it actually they connected me to some people who I really didn't previously connect to. And like we have like a little chat and we talk about all the stuff. Like we've stayed up in the middle of the night and watched their live concerts and like text each other. And so there are so many different ways to connect, and I think that that's an important thing for everyone who's listening to remember. It's like find the people who lift you up, who like make it really positive. Like we're going to go eat Korean food in New York this weekend. And like all of that is just part of like how do we again take down like those filters, because I think they're such a great example of it because they get dressed up in like kill on the stage and then they're just like doing these lives being themselves, like folding laundry or doing whatever,
Mhm.
and there's like millions of people who are just like wanting that connection. So
Exactly.
yeah. Well, Stephanie, what a joy to have you on. It is time for our rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, awesome. I should really put a BTS question in here, but we'll see if I can think that fast. So, my first actual question is what was the last thing you watched on TV?
Yesterday, I watched Dr. Slump with my family, as well as when the kids went to bed, my husband and I watched My Demon. So I'm a huge K drama, and that's why I started learning Korean.
Mm. Oh, you can speak Korean?
I mean, I can speak like an elementary student, but I've been taking it for 7 years. Yeah.
Oh, that's like a goal that I have not pursued. That's amazing. Okay. What is on your nightstand?
I do have the BTS book that they put out in their 10 year, but I also have several books, Lisa C book that my one of my very close friends gave to me, and the book Being Mortal, which I just finished, and it does talk about being the author of your own life, even towards the end, kind of morbid, but it's important as we think about the aging generation and what their wishes will be.
Very cool. I haven't heard of that. I'll put that on my list. Okay. When was the last time you tried something new and what was it?
Hmm, that's a good question. Well, I went to Vietnam recently, and that was new, and traveled with my family, including my in laws who fled Vietnam during the war and went north, south, central. And it was amazing and also eye opening as to what could have been for the family if they had not fled.
Yeah, I'm sure that was so impactful. So yeah, thank you. Okay, last one, really simple. What are your top three most used emojis?
Yeah, I heard you ask Susan that question. And I was like, I
It's
always
probably a
use
Purple Heart.
there is a
Maybe.
purple it is Purple Heart. I'm gonna pull it up right now. Cry laughing emoji, excuse me, Purple Heart and smiley face.
Perfect. Amazing. Well, everybody, we will link how to get her book in the show notes. What's the best way to reach you?
Oh, you can visit us at colorsuccesspodcast.com, and the book Cancel the Filter is on Amazon, and I'd love to hear from you guys.
Perfect. Well, congratulations. It's such a huge accomplishment to have a big project like that in the world. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been just a joy to have this conversation.
Nicole, you're amazing. You're great at listening and providing that empathic, safe space. So I so enjoyed you as an interviewer.